afternoon, everybody. I hope you're having a better show and haven't broken your ankle like I just have. I hope you agree, It's Change is a great place to be talking about stuff. We have proper conversations, don't we? And we're going to have another proper one right now, and we've got a fantastic panel. Could you put the slide up so everyone can read it? So, I'm Paul Campion. I am a moderator, apparently. We'll see how that all goes. And we've got a great panel. So we've got Mike, and you can see it yourself. Hitachi Zero Carbon, a thing which has a whole political party against it right now. We'll find out what that is later. Simon, from now Places for London, London for Places.
Places for London.
Places for London. Places for London, which is, I think, a wholly owned subsidiary of.
It is. We have one shareholder, TfL.
There you go. We'll hear a bit more about that in a second. John, who is with Equans.
That's it.
Equans. And again, he'll do a much better intro than I will. And of course, Helena, welcome as well. Right, fantastic panel, and we're going to be talking about money. Not always the most interesting topic, frankly. Very important, but always interesting. But don't worry, we'll do it with the transporty slant. So even if you don't like money, we can still talk about transport. Right, I'm going to start by just letting the panel introduce themselves briefly. So you have 90 seconds, starting from now.
Hello, everyone. Mike Nugent. I'm Chief Revenue Officer for Hitachi Zero Carbon. We're a business that was intrapreneured within Hitachi. So we built a business from what we were doing with various different projects. The main project was to do with electrifying fleet. The Optimised Prime program, which some people will be familiar with, which is all about how we could help organisations electrify, particularly from our point of view, building the technology for fleet, depot-based fleet. So we started off with some technology around smart charging, which we were covering a little bit on the previous session. But we kind of built it up from there to also look at the battery and how the battery is a unique asset, how you can extend its life, manage its life, how that can have an impact from a financial viewpoint. And we've partnered with MUFG Bank, a big Japanese bank, Hitachi being a big Japanese company, to start thinking about how we can finance assets in a smarter way than just pure as a service, where essentially all of the benefit resides with the asset owner, but we can share that. And we can use the technology to also then provide access to a lower cost of capital, and drive better outcomes from a public and a private sector perspective by extending the asset life, pushing out the asset replacement timetable, which helps the balance sheet of the asset owner, defer the capex, and actually provide access to far more attractive rates of return by using the technology to assure the assets. But we'll talk about that more as I go on.
Okay, thank you very much. Simon, by contrast, Places for London.
I'll probably be a bit shorter. Places for London are a wholly owned subsidiary of TfL. We're a relatively young business, about 10 years old. We were effectively carved out from the greater TfL empire as a property-focused company, and that focus was on optimizing the largely non-operational assets within the TfL empire, so underground buses, trams, overground, etc., for the development and operation of real estate assets and real estate income. We have very much a focus on the delivery of housing, particularly social housing within London, with across our larger schemes like Edgware Bus Station, Earls Court redevelopment, Limo Peninsula, Bollow Lane, and others. And our focus is really on the creation of revenue streams within the built environment. My focus as part of a small team is energy and electrification. So looking at the development and complementarity of energy revenue, energy systems within the built environment. And we are proud to announce that we completed our first project about 18 months ago, which was focusing on EV charging, so using legacy land around car parks, roadside locations, bits of land that was CPO'd but not used or left over after larger schemes, to create roadside locations within the capital for EV charging. And that was effectively a market-making exercise as well as a revenue opportunity, because nobody else in London has sites that are suitable for this kind of infrastructure at the moment, because they've all been developed, have plans, they've gone, to vertical development, et cetera, et cetera. the benefit of the public sector is it tends to end up with a lot of the leftover bits of land, and the benefit of the public transport sector is that it particularly ends up with those assets. And so we're looking at that, and we're also working quite closely with AECOM on a number of projects, particularly the sort of second stage of looking at energy flexibility as an asset across the land base. That's me.
Okay, fantastic. John.
Cheers, thank you. So I'm John Haynes. I'm the Strategy Director for the Digital and Energy Services Division within Equans. We are part of the Bouygues Group, so a large French multinational. And what my day job really entails is working across that, both the digital and the energy transition across the UK. That can take a few different forms on any day of the week. So at the moment, a lot of that is working on sort of grid scale infrastructure, be it sort of PV or battery storage, or taking a very careful footstep into the world of things like hydrogen, but also working really closely with partners, either behind the meter or sort of a more local level. So I think I earn my money when I'm trying to work in that intersection of sort of capital versus sort of consent and the support of public stakeholders, and then the allocation of risk, and putting all of that into the melting pot to see whether we can get some stuff done.
Okay. Look, my head's already exploding, actually, because we've got money, we've got place, we've got someone who can pronounce Bouygues. We've got the lot. Helen.
Pressure's on now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Helena Rivers. I'm at the Energy Transition Lead for the Europe region for AECOM. For those of you not familiar with AECOM, we're a global infrastructure consultancy, about 50,000 people globally and about 8,000 here in the UK. Leading on the energy transition from an AECOM perspective is very much around how we bring together that systems approach, so very much in line with today's title, and integrating new generation and storage solutions, existing and new distribution solutions to our assets in the built environment, whether that is transport, buildings, or others, and adopting some of the lessons that we've learnt from other sectors and applying them within new spaces to achieve efficiencies and accelerating the transition, recognising the real importance, but also recognising the changing political landscape and the ever-increasing importance around energy resilience in today's society.
Okay. Right, so look, the session is about financing a transition. And it talks about collaboration and financing, and without wanting to be too sort of naughty about it, financing and collaboration don't always feel like they're happy bedfellows. We can go into this topic in like 100 different ways, but let me make it really difficult for the panel and suggest we start by asking how these critical elements are actually going to deliver outcomes in an environment where the major client here, who is, broadly speaking, a local authority normally, whatever that means, probably hasn't got the depth of skills to be able to engage across all of these disciplines. And one of the reasons why it's such a fantastic panel is because we've got such a breadth of the different elements here. We've got land, we've got money, we've got expertise, we've got technology, we've got innovation. This is all great. We can imagine some fantastic outcomes. Why are we not getting them today? Is the answer not that we are, as a society, not resourcing the client with sufficient capability to draw out all the goodness? Or, in fact, is that complete nonsense? Helena, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I've got a more positive perspective than you, in that I think there are pockets of excellence happening right now, and real acceleration in this integrated place-based approach. And we're seeing strategic energy partnerships, or SEPs as they're commonly being referred to, being developed at very significant scales around the country, and a real recognition of the diverse teams needed to make them happen. The public sector's very important role around that convener, around that enabling things to happen, around being able to draw down on grants, around having space available for development of new assets, and being able to provide early commitment around offtake, therefore reducing the commercial risk for the funders to be able to come in and support the development, but recognizing that actually they are not best placed to enable it to be implemented, and relying very heavily on the private sector to form the collaborative teams which can actually deliver over an extended period, attracting significant amounts of private sector finance to unlock the individual projects, which, you know, the public sectors have the vision up front to develop those energy transition pathways, decarbonisation pathways, whatever we would like to call them, depending on where they are, but actually recognising that everybody has a role to play, and no one organisation has all of the answers. And this really complex piece of integrating the right outcomes for heat, with the right outcomes for power, with the right outcomes for transport solutions, by taking that place-based approach. And I think that's a huge change, and without intending to be political, but that devolution's really driving that place-based approach. And I think it's an area where we can celebrate that there is success. And we're relatively early on the journey. We've got lots of, you know, early SEPs in operation. Each of them are evolving as they're coming to market. And there's lessons that we are sharing and taking to the next ones. But I don't see, you know, I see that as being very much the path for the energy transition.
Well, I love the optimism, and I am absolutely sure there are pockets of excellence. Is that what you're seeing, though, John? I mean, across the piece, do you actually see people who have the freedom to exercise that creativity and to look across the silos like that?
So I would wholeheartedly agree with Helena in terms of there absolutely are pockets. It is just pockets, though, I suppose, at the moment. I suppose we should be challenging ourselves to replicate what works well, and probably as importantly, if not more importantly, learn from the things that haven't quite worked. And whilst every place has its own nuances and is unique, there are many things that do sort of move across geographies, certainly within the boundaries of, you know, the same broader countries as well. So if something works in Bristol, there's a fairly good chance it would work in Manchester. There's a fairly good chance that might work in Newcastle. There's a fairly good chance that could work across the whole of London or in a collection of boroughs. So I think, you know, we are getting better at this, and we're learning from ones that don't go so well and also replicating from where things do go well. I think from my perspective, and it's probably an odd place for me to start, given the sort of organisation that I work for, I think the equity and the visible fairness that needs to be demonstrated right from the start of a process is really, really important. It's without that, I think that often is what ends up feeding some of that sort of policy instability. And I think we'll all sit here and talk about, you know, it's difficult when politics change, and it's difficult when you think you're operating one set of rules and then they change. But that policy stability really is what unlocks an awful lot of things, be it the allocation of capital or in terms of what we do as a private sector partner, and we're the contractor, right? We're the people that deliver the works in the likes of those SEPs. You know, we are really up for taking our sort of equitable share of risk. You know, what we want is that given to us in a transparent way and in a consistent way. Where it gets difficult is where lots of different places do it really differently, because then you're prototyping over and over again, which I think just introduces time and uncertainty.
Well, I'll come to you in a second, but can I just come back on that? Because equity is a fundamental requirement here, isn't it? There is no transition which is not an equitable transition. We politically won't be allowed to do that. And yet, famously, finance in particular is a bit particular about who gets the money. You can't have it if you need it. Mm-hmm. You can only have it if you can promise that you can pay it back, which means you didn't need it in the first place. So to what extent do we actually feel that we've got funding mechanisms here that can enable a just transition?
So again, I think we've got better at it. So, you know, apologies for people in the room who this will upset. You know, I cut my teeth in my junior years coming up in a world of PFI. So again, I'll not take us down that rabbit hole in terms of that's got a certain connotations around it. But more recently, things like Social Housing Decarb Fund or Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, my view is they've been really successful. And what they started off is pump priming a sector that was kind of at its very beginning. And as they've gone through later stages, there's been a greater ask of local authority partners, which has turned into a greater ask of delivery partners. But that's kind of followed quite a neat path in terms of there was a lot of help at the beginning, and as it went through different waves, there was a greater ask. But I think that was a transition that certainly we as a delivery partner, we could really understand that because we dipped our toe in at the start, and what worked kept working.
Okay. I'm desperately going to try and find some bad news here. I'm going to keep poking. Simon, more on the client side. Do you actually see the supply chain coming to you with creativity and solutions, or are they still trapped behind a procurement boundary, which means that actually you have to tell them what the answer is before they can bid to you?
Look, I'm in a fairly fortunate position of being able to innovate from within a public sector organization, admittedly within quite defined initial boundaries, but we are able to look at these things in ways that others don't. And the great advantage of Places is that it has taken a view of saying, well, how do we do these things? And it's focused on joint ventures, a sort of 49-51 public-private partnership to allow it to do everything from the likes of the Earls Court development through to other social housing, development of a number of joint ventures around student and commercial development. I think the one thing that is observed within the public sector is that there is a reliance on very good, very strong advice from trusted partners, engineering, finance, zero carbon, engineering-led, et cetera, But I think the drawback within the public sector is that it tends to think that it has to start again at every step. Every time a different organization wants to do something that's quite similar to what a previous organization has already done, it goes, right, I better go and, off to the hardware store to buy the bricks and the mortar and the cement and the wood and the nails and the tiles. I've been pushing very much for the idea of creating a sort of tiger team capability that says, I've delivered this asset type within this public sector organization. Can we create a platform that says, I will go and do it across different boroughs, different organizations? There is, I think, a tremendous opportunity because of the size of the pool of potential for, let's say, zero carbon energy infrastructure, energy storage, energy generation, across the different public sector organizations, but I do think that it needs not to start from scratch every single time. What you need to say is, how do I create the sort of transferability of skills across government departments and deliver that way? Because let's be honest, a lot of the time the dive is very deep on some of these big projects, but it isn't necessarily very long. It's a 3 to 5 year program, and then you're done and you throw it over to an O&M structure. You don't need everyone to have everything everywhere, because actually at some point in time you run out of things to do because you've done it well. The greatest success is fundamentally that you should make yourself redundant. That's what I was always taught in the private sector. The problem is the public sector doesn't like that.
Well, and maybe it's possible that the private sector colludes a bit. For any of you who haven't, I can't recommend highly enough the book by the wonderfully named Professor Bent Flubier, which is How Big Things Get Done. Because he says one of the key problems inside all major infrastructure projects is the idea that this time it's different, this is the first time. And actually, people have been building roads consistently across the world for decades and decades and decades. You aren't the first person to try and do this, and why do it? So the supply chain, whatever, big, is quite strongly financially motivated to do things for the first time. And the clients perhaps aren't sufficiently confident to hold their feet to the fire and say, no. Please stop gold plating this. This is just a road, or it's just a piece of grid infrastructure, whatever it may be, and do that. What do you think about that in zero carbon land?
I think, so we come more from understanding the private sector requirement, and we've seen business models where I think you've either seen people that do want to gold plate it, or they want to hog the supernormal profits that are available, particularly if you start getting into
Sorry, I'm just going to write. Where can I find these supernormal profits?
you can find them in battery, because you can do a lot more with the battery than its first life. And it's got a second life. It's got lots of opportunity to do more. But if the private sector just owns that asset outright, then it can restrict the way that the asset can be used in its first life. So we come very much from a bus perspective at the moment. We're moving into EHGVs. And from a bus point of view, you can, 3-4 years ago, you could get to scale quite quickly with some of the private operators, and you could bring private money into that. The big challenge that we're facing today is that we're asking the combined authorities not only to franchise, but to electrify at the same time. So they are looking for the right kind of answers. And there's enough exemplars around the world that tell you that there are certain ways you can do this, which may be beneficial in terms of speed. So you can go full as a service, and you can exploit that kind of business model, but you're not then retaining the asset, and you can't then do something with it as you go on.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to get to, our view from a Hitachi point of view is, can you do something which is a little bit more different? Can you leverage private money as equity to create, and you've got a great off-taker, as in the parlance of the financial world, you've got the transport authorities, the combined authorities. Can you then bring in private finance, not in a PFI way, but in a combined, co-invested way, sharing in the risk, but most importantly, using the technology to manage that asset in the most effective way. So you can take the existing templates, but you can bring innovation into that to think in a different way, to go, well, actually, why shouldn't the public purse benefit from the longer asset lifetime? Why shouldn't the public purse benefit from technology which extends the life of that asset, and that you can and benefit from fixed battery storage as you take those batteries out of the buses in a few years' time, but not have to be the bearer of all the risk? Because a lot of the time we've seen is you put all the risk onto the public purse and take all the profit from the private sector.
Let me just challenge you on that a bit, because I understand what it says on the contract.
Yeah.
In reality, can the risk ever be truly transferred if the local authority retains the legal obligation to provide a service?
This is the classic asset owner, asset operator dilemma, right? So, and that's the way that we've tried to look at it. In a sense, we've got the exemplar of, you've got First Bus, who we work with, who are the operator, and you've got First Group, who are the asset owner. First Group want that asset to last as long as possible. First Bus just want to make sure that the buses run day to day. So what we do in that scenario, you can get to a win-win by using the technology and the data to say, look, that's an asset that's getting stressed. You need to take it away from that driver who's got a heavy right foot, or take it off that route that has got so much too hilly, or even take that bus out of the cold climate of Scotstoun and Glasgow and put it down in Portsmouth. Think about the way that you're managing the assets in a smarter way. So we're trying to bring that operational expertise into play, but we're also bound by the service level agreements. So that if the vehicle doesn't leave the depot with sufficient charge, it's our toes that are being held to the fire. It's not the public sector that then just has to go, oh, well, we'll just bear that, and that's our problem. We're contractually bound. So you can write the right kind of contracts that put the right kind of tension, but also the right incentive in place for all parties.
Okay. All right. Very interesting. Thank you. Can I come back to this equity point? Because I think it's really, really, really fundamental. Right? We're all rich, actually, in this room. And forgive me if you don't feel you are, but I think it's probably, as a generalisation, we're not a population in this room who is unable to afford a car and is somehow disenfranchised from social or economic opportunities because the transport infrastructure prevents them from accessing it. I'm going to make that statement. If you are in that situation, I apologise, but let's just go with the point. To what extent do we actually think that we as clients, supply chain, collaborators in this transition are really able to bring lived experience to a just transition? So I just came from the integrated transport session, first half of, and Danny Williams was saying that his guiding light on the integrated plan was accessibility. I'm sure you know the numbers, right? At any given moment, 20% of us are in some way disabled from accessing transport. I say at any given moment because none of us are born able to walk, and few of us will still be able to walk by the time we get to the other end of the journey, and we go in and out of disability throughout our lives, even if we don't carry disability for parts of it. And by disability, I mean the system disables us from access. 20% of the population at any given time, and the accessibility gap is 37% of journeys. So I'm just going to, by the way, the assessed value of that to the economy is £70 billion. £70 billion we are missing opportunity out because 20% of people take 30% fewer trips than they otherwise could if we did this right. Now that's a statement today, which means up till this point, we didn't get it right. How confident are we that we can get it right? So let's take your point, and I'll throw it back. You say, okay, if we're smart, we can write the right contract. I'm sure that's probably true. Can we do that and, at the same time, create a decarbonisation pathway and, at the same time, create a fully accessible transport? I mean, can we actually do all this stuff at once? Or, in truth, are we always optimising for some outcome or other?
I think it's the latter, in reality. I think you have to be realistic. I think that goes to the point I'm making, that I think from a combined authority point of view, you're trying to both take over the franchises, which in itself is a huge challenge, and you're trying to decarbonise and electrify the fleet at the same time. And you're trying to then think about, well, I'm the asset owner, how do I protect from the operator abusing that position? How do I make sure it's competitive? Ultimately, from an accessibility point of view, where you want to get to, you can have a metric, which is total cost of ownership, and you want to bring the total cost of ownership down as much as possible, which means that hopefully we can reverse the direction of travel in terms of the number of buses that are available to people across the country. Since COVID, it's reduced in huge amounts. So that enabling factor has to be that we're making that more accessible through price. But in the meantime, you've got all of the challenges around infrastructure and the objections to protected zones, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, even putting in bus lanes. At the moment, we're still in that mindset that the way you enable it is through the private ownership of a vehicle. I think so. I'm way over here. I'm talking now over here, which is an area of not my expertise, which is transport policy. What I can control in what we do is try and make them as accessible and as cheap as they possibly can, and clean and efficient and operational and resilient. But I don't, so from a public sector point of view, their challenge is far, far wider to answer all of those questions. And I do think it is inevitably going to be siloed. So I think inevitably you have to then pick off the opportunities as you go along and try and improve it on an incremental basis. You cannot systemically shift the UK from the private vehicle to the public vehicle and create greater access in one fell swoop. Okay, so a lot of things you might want to ask questions on, by the way, and I'm going to come into questions in the audience in a moment. Simon, I don't know whether you count yourself as being purely in the public or purely in the private, but the bit of you that's in the public sector, do you spend every night fretting about the dead hand of the Treasury?
No. Okay. I think, we sit in a fortunate position because we are creating revenue for the benefit of A, a balance sheet, B, decarbonisation of London and improvement in air quality, and then the enabling element of the energy transition. With the EV charging JV that we set up, which is with Fastned, the Dutch EV company, we're inevitably servicing the privately owned or leased vehicle. Now, in London, privately owned and leased isn't everyone having a Tesla Model Y. It's 70 to 80% of vehicles on the road are supporting a fleet of some kind. Goods, services, people, and combinations of those. There's very few privately owned or leased vehicles in London as a comparator to other parts of the country. So what we're doing with the EV charging JV is we're driving down that marginal cost of fueling the vehicle, putting energy in the vehicle, putting electricity in the vehicle. And we're doing so and deliberately in a way that is trying to incentivize the London market to do that adoption, particularly amongst those commercial vehicles who don't have anywhere else to charge because depot charging is in its infancy, shared infrastructure, shared access to grid capacity and the locations to charge vehicles that are bigger than sort of van size is really challenging in London because it's a dense urban cityscape. On the other side, we've got the public sector view of, some work that we're doing at the moment with energy infrastructure and storage in some of our larger locations. How can we pump prime grid capacity to deliver connection capacity and resilience and peak looping and storage that supports the quicker development of everything else that everybody else is planning in London, whether they are, the GLA backing local area energy plans, whether they are, private developers who otherwise can't get grid connections, particularly in West London, as a known issue. How can we, as a landholder, develop assets that help the grid to help developers? So I sit there with a sort of two lenses, both of which I think are useful, not always mutually compatible within one working day or one working week. But I do think that, sharing that best practice view and going back to, the other point of, creating this tiger team that can go, well, we've done it here, why don't we just go and do it there? Because you don't really need to go and try and do it yourself from scratch.
So London has got a whole set of challenges which are particular to London. Okay, you have argued that a lot of that may be transferable to Manchester or to Liverpool or something. In practice, I don't think it does get transferred much, but I take the principle. Yeah. But maybe, John, Helen, I could ask you to think about other parts of the country as we think about this issue. And if we think about Northumberland, or actually the northeast area, which has to try and manage both Newcastle and Northumberland, then a lot of the things that work in London, a lot of the problems that London's got, which do need to be solved, I'm not trying to play both ends against the middle here, but a lot of those solutions will not be applicable. How do we balance this sort of great mass of potentially conflicting objectives, which we're all trying to do all at once, and then worry about low density as well? If you don't want to answer that, feel free.
Who wants to take it first?
Yeah.
I'm happy to try.
You go then.
So I think it's back to where I was with the SEPs and the fact that it's a place-based approach. So the right approach for a very heavily developed urbanised area in London is very different to the right approach for Northumberland. Interestingly, I think what we'll find is that there are a lot more revenue generation opportunities where we are less densely populated in Northumberland, in our example, because we've got a lot more opportunity for generation and storage within that geographic area. The most challenging element within that then is where we've got the densities for consumption and the offtake agreements, and therefore whether to that creating opportunity for everyone. In London, we will always have behind the wire solutions, which mean that our power becomes cheaper, as opposed to in less densely populated areas, we're much more reliant on the grid and therefore our DNOs, and therefore we've got a lot more infrastructure costs in association with providing those integrated solutions. But we do have great case studies for success in Northumberland, with the Northumberland line being delivered, huge passenger numbers, recreation of previous rail networks which had stopped and have come back and have shown themselves to be commercially viable solutions, increasing that accessibility to the local communities. So I think it's a great case study for actually the fact that you build it and people will come. There was a lot of faith went into business models in association with creating that Northumberland line, and it has proven to be more popular than the business model projections, which is the best possible outcome.
Okay.
I mean, it's lovely of you to make me feel like I'm at home, Paul, as a user of said Northumberland line. So you work with what you've got, right? So I agree entirely with some of the points that Elaine has made in terms of, you've got some assets in that part of the world that you don't have if you're in a large sort of metropolitan built-up area. So I think also it's really interesting to see how the anchor tenants and sort of the major actors within that place would collaborate. So shout out to my Hitachi friends in the audience, of which there are a few. So you see really good examples in terms of that region's got a trust port. In fact, it's got 2 trust ports in that part of the world. It's got an airport that's part owned by all 7 of the local authorities. It's got some really interesting, big sort of central actors in that region who are showing how you can work together on some things, and actually then you can get allocation of risk and reward sat into a model that can actually get some things done.
And I'll offer you for nothing, it's got a renewable energy cluster.
It has indeed, yes.
So as you're saying, Helen, it's got assets as well as liabilities. Okay, look, I've certainly talked enough. I can't believe that you haven't got questions that you want to ask this fantastic panel. So we've got a roving mic. Has anyone got any questions? I mean, if not, I'll carry on. No? No, they're content to take anything we feed them.
Exactly.
Can you believe this? Right, so let's take it on a bit. We're talking about doing a lot of new things, and they probably involve new technology and so on. That all sounds very risky to me. How are we going to manage this balance between complexity and risk? I'll go back to my Bent Flubia thing. The whole point is we know how to build roads, but maybe we don't know how to build a new distributed grid with lots of different generation points, a completely different management topology. Maybe we don't know quite how to have that interact with the transport system. And even if we did, maybe we don't know how to harden that against climatic events. I haven't talked much about sustainability, but we probably expect the water level to go up and down a bit more than it has in the past. So how are we going to manage that risk in that? And what are the financial implications of that? Because in my experience, risk here actually means much, much higher price. Anyone wants to volunteer to go on that one? No?
Yeah, so we're working with, so Transport for Scotland are looking at how do they basically deliver electrified HGV fleet. And what we're trying to do is combine there's a number of consortium partners that we're working with, but we're trying to combine the technology, the financial knowledge and capability, the fact that you can use essentially Scottish government money as the seed equity, and really to provide, in a sense, the guarantees for repayment of debt. It becomes, that takes a huge amount of risk out of the entire picture from a financial point of view and from an applicant point of view. Because ultimately what we're trying to do here is we're trying to democratize access to low-cost capital to deliver electrification to essentially small to medium-sized hauliers who don't have the same kind of access that, say, a First Bus or even a local authority itself would actually have to itself. So giving them the ability to access through a special purpose vehicle, the funding at a low cost that can finance the provision of the vehicle from an EHG perspective, but also to finance the deployment of strategically placed infrastructure at ports and in major cities, so that, and Scotland's, and the UK actually is kind of uniquely positioned really at the moment from an EHGV point of view, because we don't have that many miles, and the opportunity to do on demand and en route charging is far greater in this country than say if you were in the States. So we have the opportunity to think about several strategic locations for hubs for charging and get that financed, take away the risk from a delivery point of view of guaranteed access to kilowatt hours, and also provide access to low-cost capital to facilitate the provision of the vehicles and to finance the actual electrification itself. Put that in both public and private hands through the appropriate investment of equity and debt, because there's a lot of companies and a lot of organizations that want to put money into sustainable solutions. We kind of see our role as Hitachi as being that conduit to bring that public and public demand for solutions, private desire to supply finance, bring those things together in the right kind of way that actually takes the risk out, and then build a technology platform around that that means that people know when and where they can access the kilowatt hours. They know how many miles they've got left on their vehicle. They know where they, if they were, it's almost as if they were driving a Tesla and they knew exactly where they needed to charge, direct them to the right kind of place to get the charge, take the risk out of it, and make the transition from the diesel-based fleet to an electric-based fleet as risk-free as possible, and then deliver all of the ancillary benefit that then brings from an environmental and a sustainable point of view.
So we're back on this thing about creativity, and I hear what you're saying about, as it were, the measurable financial risk. It feels to me, though, that this might feel like career risk for some of the people in the client. Not because they're bad people, but actually the culture they work in is often not conducive to this level of creativity. And it doesn't matter how many spreadsheets you show, they might feel as if they are exposing them a bit. Again, so I'm not going to ask you sort of to tell me, it's all right, we're among friends, you can be honest. But do you see some of that around you?
Look, I think when I first started working, someone said to me, if you're a salesman, the easiest thing to do is to sell the same thing to the same guy again and again and again.
Professor Ansoff.
Sometimes you sell a new thing to the same person, or you sell, iterations of that, but never sell a new thing to a new person.
Correct.
And that's the challenge in the public sector, is it iterates slowly. Particularly Transport Authority, it's been doing something for quite a long time. It may have started 100, 150 years ago as TfL.
200 if it's the railway.
Yeah, if TfL is over 150 years old now. Railway lines even older than that. But there's never been a point of revolution after that first idea of the iron horse, right? The rest of it has been, steam is replaced by diesel, diesel is replaced by electricity. The challenge for the public sector is if you are in a role-based environment where you are supporting a continuing activity, you're never really incentivized to innovate. And you can't procure innovation in the public sector because you don't know what the spec is. Because innovation by itself is not spec-based, it is ideas-based. The corollary to that is that you are very well advised by people like AECOM and others who surround organizations in the public sector and provide advice from all perspectives. The challenge is, how do you make sure that there is some momentum going forward to say, well, once I've started an idea to ask a question, I take the output of that analysis into an action, and the action becomes a project, and the project becomes the Elizabeth line, hypothetically. You lose momentum very quickly, not because of any particular thing, other than that's how the public sector tends to behave. It doesn't like new thing unless it's defined within the existing job specs that are available. And that's not meant to be negatively, but it's this transition between, I can get all the great advice in the world, but I don't necessarily know what to do with it next.
Yeah, I was going to quibble a bit with your saying the public sector is innovation allergic, because it may be, but actually I think the supply chain has been trained to be innovation allergic as well.
That's correct.
And my case in point is the construction industry. So round numbers, let's just take highways. Round numbers, we spend about £5 billion a year maintaining the strategic road network. Let's double that for the local rest. It's £10 billion a year. And over the last 40 years, according to the Office for National Statistics, productivity in that industry has not changed at all. It's precisely zero productivity gain in 40 years, which is the entirety of my career. It's not entirely my fault. But what you have there is an industry which clearly does not believe there's a reward for innovation, does not believe there's a reward for productivity. You know, a client which is not rewarding productivity or innovation. And so, of course, we have an industry that's innovation allergic. And I'm a bit concerned by this, because we are talking, are we not, about a set of societal challenges and opportunities which are truly transformational, to your point. And we now suddenly need to learn how to change pretty blooming quick. So, as a representative of the private sector of the supply chain, what are you doing about it?
We've managed to get quite a long way through this panel without talking about AI, but I feel like it's got to come in at this stage.
Oh, dear.
But, you know, realistically, you're quite right. We've all adopted digital alongside the way that we've always done things. And we've used it as a mechanism for early stage solutions. We've used it as a mechanism for much more transparent reporting, but we haven't used it to fundamentally change the way that we deliver projects. I'm an optimist. I believe that through AI learning and that ability to consolidate the road design for all of the roads that we've delivered across the UK into a single platform, and for the design to be adapted based on the ground conditions for wherever our next road is going to be, will alter that. But it's not going to be an immediate solution because nobody's going to trust those answers. And we've got a journey to undertake. And I can only talk from an AECOM perspective. So we invested in an AI organisation in about November. It's been quite a significant culture change within AECOM as we learn to provide our design solutions in an anonymised way into a digital platform, which will then tell us how we should have done things differently. And that's not very comfortable. But also, we have got that same journey to take all of our clients on. So our clients, a lot of them don't want us to be providing their design solutions that they have bought, they own the intellectual property for, into this bot to inform the next organisation. And I think, there is that change programme is exactly that. It's a change programme. And unless we recognise that it is and embrace that across the whole industry, then we're going to fail to realise the same benefits that we ought to have realised from digitalisation of design. But as we have shifted the way that we deliver projects anyway to using much more international design support, recognising our skills gap that we experience here in Western Europe, then I think that helps to enable that next shift. But we can't do a shift in isolation. It absolutely has to be across sector. And the problem with where we are right now is that we're talking about whole system solutions. So it is not the road sector saying, hey, yep, we've got this, but we need all the sectors to say, hey, yep, we've got this. We understand that there is a need for change, and we collectively need to go on that journey. And how you phase that programme is a phenomenal challenge. But I do think that most organisations recognise that need for change within a risk framework that they're comfortable with. And I think that risk profile is going to change hugely over the next 10 years ahead of us. And some of the challenges that we're going to face is that there are, at the moment, loads of senior project delivery people, senior designers who've spent their entire careers doing all of those steps along the journey to become in their roles. If in the future we don't have any of the teams doing the steps that we've taken in our career progressions, actually, do we still have those competent decision makers as our mechanism for implementation changes? And I think, our education system will need to change around this. It is fundamental whole system change. So do I think it's an easy solution, a quick solution? No, I don't. Do I think it's a journey that we're on? Yes, I do. But how successfully we implement that solution, I think, it remains very much to be seen.
Okay, very, very interesting. So we had a session last night, actually, sort of fringe meeting, precisely on this question of how can the sector adopt AI, what does it mean to people at various stages in their careers. So I'm sort of very keen to take that conversation up, but I'm not going to. I'm going to restrain myself for once, and I'm going to ask John whether you're feeling that same imperative that Helen was talking about, because what I'm hearing is that for you within your organisation, you've started a change programme. I'm also hearing you saying, oh yeah, that's not, no matter if AECOM do it, right? Everyone's got to do it simultaneously, otherwise the sector hasn't changed. Are you doing it?
So I would have put my 10 Great British pounds on us talking about grid constraints before AI, but there's still 10 minutes or so maybe to get onto that. So I echo and see a lot of the things that Helene is talking about. And in fact, I suspect certainly from a AECOM and a Hitachi perspective, they will feel this when often the challenges we talk about, we've got this fantastic technology or we've got this great new partnership vehicle, but just because it works in, Santiago or Singapore, does it work in Stockton? Getting things to move across geographies at times is half the battle. I think if we got better at copying things quickly, that could solve quite a lot of our problems. And that might be looking at where systems have worked better together and putting more energy in thinking about how we can get solutions to come across boundaries. Now, if it's a physical geography issue, that's a little bit harder to fix.
Yeah.
But if it's a regulatory thing, that's something that a group could coalesce around. I think there's a really interesting point that Mike made as well around really careful use of vehicles and really careful use of structures. So again, another thing I probably hadn't thought I'd be talking about today, and the finance and the people in the room, apologies, because you'll know, I'll tell you something you already know, but the baby that no one wants to hold in terms of a contingent liability, so that which you cannot quantify, that everybody hates. In lieu of no one wanting it, sometimes a vehicle can hold it, and then you're effectively holding hands together on it. We've got to get better at that because there will be some things within this which are really hard to quantify.
Yep.
And that we can all sort of say what we don't want to do and why it's difficult or why it's hard. I think the counter to that is also spending time thinking around the output. So I think we talked about an as-a-service model, which everyone probably understands. I think if we all were to agree that behind every service contract is some form of outcomes, and again, KPIs are really easy when they're input, respond within 30 minutes, keep something within a temperature range, things like this. But if an output is a much, much bigger societal thing, even if you can't connect a dot directly to it, that's something that a whole system can coalesce around.
Yep.
And then it brings us all the way back probably to the equity point, which you were so taken with at the start, I suppose, in terms of that starts getting into a place of things that are fair, things that everyone could, if not directly support, they could certainly give their consent to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's so many avenues we could explore here. I mean, again, I'm very tempted to go off after the whole sort of Green Book business case type of thing you're opening up there. It was being talked about maybe in this room, actually, in one of these rooms. I think I'm right in saying the Treasury keeps on telling government departments to lean into the strategic case and not lean on BCRs, and departments keep on not doing that. And that brings in this whole set of issues we're very well aware of, that that 1% in London is just worth more than 1% in Stockport, because and they're not comparable, and yet we compare them. Big we, somehow, somewhere. But again, let's not go down that, because I want to come back to Helena's point, and the thing we were talking about the system dynamics here. If we are going to get change here, and let's talk about the two key sectors that we've been talking about, right? Transport and energy. Let's just talk about those. If we're going to get change in those sectors, then it's no good just AECOM doing it. Well, that'd be good for AECOM, right? But the chances are AECOM will begin developing stuff that no one's able to buy. And it's no good just London doing it, because Northumberland. How do we, going back to the word in the thing, how are we going to get collaboration across these sectors so we can move forward together and actually generate some different outcomes? You'd be pleased to know this is the last question, but it's probably the most important. So let's start at this end again.
I'll be quick. I think it's about you've got to have big systemized thinking, but you need to start small, because I think you need to take people on a journey, but you need to know where you're going to. So so again, just from an example of what we're doing, we're working with Transport for Greater Manchester. They want to just start really working on the technology. really integrating their entire transport network, but starting with and wider into their housing and social networks, and thinking about how that could all be financed through these type of mechanisms and vehicles. But there's no, you can have conversations forever about the big picture. And actually, the big picture would be using perhaps Manchester in the longer term as an exemplar for all the other combined authorities. There'll be some political implications around that, but nonetheless, from an economic and a business model point of view, you need to create the right kind of exemplars that says this is how you can do it. So I think it's thinking big but starting small, but knowing that the small has to have an endpoint, and where you're trying to get it to is through collaboration, is through a whole system thinking, is through the wider goals.
Okay. And Simon, London inevitably needs to take responsibility to be a leader here, I think, for a whole set of reasons.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think we have a reputation as innovating around the delivery of transport infrastructure across the UK as well as internationally. We have a lot of work that we do with on an advisory basis to countries that are starting at all sorts of points, from having very little to having something that they want to optimize, or to something that they want to renew. That's a proven outcome. But I think, in my view, I would go back to the point of, keep it simple. You don't need to be perfect in order for it to be much better. And if you can do something that clearly has a defined outcome, all you really need to do is to make sure that you don't close off any avenues to optimization or iteration, which is challenging in public sector procurement outside of a joint venture structure, and those take some time to set up. But if you can work with people who advise you well, if you can work with people who support you well on finance and then on delivery, then I think what you simply need to avoid is the tendency to sort of stagnate, to sort of, everything ends up in a logjam. As long as you say to people, let's just make sure that there is an incentive to keep going to a positive outcome, and incentivize people in various ways to achieve that, and to use all of the resources, because let's put it this way, as you say, we're rich. We are surrounded by competence. We've probably got the greatest aggregation of competence in this industry, industries, in this
just
venue
in this room,
in this venue over the next couple of days. So as long as it's better, bear that in mind, and there has to be a point at which you say, just do it, right? Because it will be better. Making sure that you don't close off doors to optimization.
Agreed. John, how do we move the industry and the clients together as one?
So I think, when it was said before, that trying to contractualize innovation is a really, really hard thing. And it is the death of many partnerships in some respects. So I'll repeat what some have already said, and I think what I've said as well. So I think keeping it simple is really, really important. I think that community and civic consent is absolutely critical, because that's what brings some policy stability to things, which certainly, capital markets and private sector partners really value that. I think then understanding ultimately what the goal is of any partnership or any form of endeavour. So if that is to improve air quality, that's the ultimate outcome of something. Everyone can understand that. If it's to give more people access to a warm home, everyone can understand that. If it's to invest in a Northumberland line, it's a limit so that people can move from one place to another easier, and they can do something in 20 minutes that takes them 50 minutes. Everyone can understand that, and that's something everyone can coalesce around. So I think that's really important. And then maybe the only other thing I'd add is get better at copying what's worked elsewhere. Copy with pride. There's a reason why people always are smiling when they get a bronze medal in the Olympics. It seems to be the one that everyone seems to be quite happy about. Doing something for the third time is not a bad place to be, because if it's worked once somewhere and not worked once somewhere, you can take the best of both and come third.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And Helen, the last word.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. The only thing that I would like to add is, once we've done that initial quick win, early advanced solution program, monitor how it's delivering and shout about those results. At the moment, we have fantastic innovation, which has delivered brilliant results, and nobody knows about it. And we need to find ways to engage the public, to create that storytelling and build engagement and enthusiasm and drive to accelerate the delivery.
Brilliant. So look, the question turns out to be the answer. How are we going to make this better? Through finance and collaboration. Happy days.
Yeah.
We're going to keep it simple. We're going to copy with pride. And we're not going to expect perfection, except when we listen to a panel as good as this. Please thank them.